Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Socially Radical Guitars. Song you heard just now was "The Captain's Hat" by the Rocket Pirates on the eponymous named album, The Rocket Pirates. Um, Great guest, Alexander Stone. He's leaving a message to the people of Canada, and I hope you listen in because the music is very old school, very 60s. And now we have our guest. Our guest is the Deputy Chairperson of the Communist Party of Kenya, and he's been active politically for a while, and the party is definitely coming up. So stay tuned for what happens in the 2022 elections in Kenya when they happen. So Booker, welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me for the show. And I look forward to a good revolutionary debate and also to inform our listeners on the political events that are happening in the Southern Hemisphere, in Africa, in East Africa, and particularly in Kenya from a leftist perspective.
Yes, very good, very good. Um, I just want to begin by asking, um, when did you get involved in the Communist Party of Kenya? Like, what stage was the party in when you got involved, and why did you get involved? You know, just so people learn a little bit more about you and how you evolved to your current political position.
Yes, the I could say that in a nutshell, I am a product of student activism and student movements. And my ideological frame has changed over time. I definitely was not born a Marxist or even a communist either. But like we do, we always start somewhere. And I come from a background of peasantry, or what you call petty bourgeois, a rural, area in Western Kenya. And I think the struggles of life there made me look for various ways to look for solutions because we basically lived in abject poverty. So you cannot imagine, but the first time I came to the city was when I was coming to pursue my, university education, which was basically a loan system. So the struggle just did not stop by my rural upbringing, but even in the city, it was quite a struggle to meet the daily needs. So my frame of mind at that time, I think I was more tilted towards anarchism and just trying to be a rebel because of certain material conditions that had placed that the system has placed in Kenya at that time. But when I joined university, I found various political clubs that I could shape my political ideology and introduced myself to really nationalistic literature. It was based on romanticization of Kenyan politics, just petty nationalism. But then, in the period that I took part in the student activism and trying to find a solution, then I met the leader of the university of the lecturers union, and we started to form up quite, you know, an annex between the student movement and the working class movement in the university. And in that way, then I got introduced to several literatures on Lenin, particularly on the national equation, because the debates at that time in the university was about basically the unity of the East Africa. There was a question of Pan-Africanism, and even there was a bit of a talk on if Pan-Africanism should be focused on African socialism or scientific socialism. So such were the debates that were taking place. However, at that time, if you look at the history of Kenyan political development, we did not have a Communist Party of Kenya at that time in Kenya in, let us say, 2000 and even in 1997, that was operating overtly. But most of because we had a dictator in our country for many years that ruled us for almost over 27 years. And communist literature was literally banned as seditious. There was a seditious laws that was making it illegal. So even the progressive then had to go, covert to try and organize a party underground under various names. So if you come to Kenya, you will find a string of history that originally was from the student underground movement to try and build a progressive, beyond the legality or beyond the legal space at that time in our country. So there was a December 12th movement, and then we had the Mwakenya movement. All of them were underground movements. And then in 1997, the revolutionaries find a home in what was called Social Democratic Party of Kenya. But it was not a reform party. It was basically a revolutionary party, but for legality purposes and for covert work, we were able to run that party covertly under a reform agenda of Social Democratic Party. So this went up to only about after the promulgation of the 2010 constitution in our country, which was also a product of the struggle of the people to make sure that we are able to delink ourselves from the neo-colonial, actually the colonial constitution that was in place at that time, the Manchester one that we inherited from the British. And with a few amendments, the 2010 gave a new way to adorn in Kenya. And, from that, then the process to start off the Communist Party overtly, actively started. And it was not only after 2017 election that the party officially held its national congress and called themselves what they have always been, the Communist Party of Kenya. So that is a brief history of my involvement in the struggle in Kenya.
Okay, so the first official open Congress was 2017. You would say.
We will say that the first time that we filed our documents to call ourselves communist was thereabout, but we had to then hold the National Congress only a year later, which was 2019, actually in January. And we declared ourselves what we are, that we have been communists, and at this particular moment, it is rational or logical to call ourselves what we are, which is the Communist Party of Kenya.
Excellent. That's quite a history, and it's quite a thing to note when a lot of the tropes against communists is that they're the repressive ones, they're the ones putting people underground, when in fact the ones being put underground were communists in a dictatorship. So that's something to note. So the party is relatively new. It's dealing with the emerging situation and the emerging struggles throughout the African continent, and the fact that you've been able to appear openly kind of shows that the balances are shifting somewhat in your favor. Can you talk about the current political situation and the current economic situation within Kenya, and how the Communist Party is reacting to that?
Yes, maybe to take the discussion from your last comment is the anti-communism propaganda is very much alive. In fact, even in the academic circles where sometimes I get engaged both in the lecture rooms and even among the academia and in the media space, the anti-communism propaganda that is, of course, glazed with lies and exaggeration of certain mistakes maybe that happened within the socialist experiments elsewhere is alive everywhere in our country. But also, we know that capitalism is the dominating political ideology. And if we take a look at the historical line, we know that every epoch, normally the ideas that dominate at that point are ideas of the ruling class. And that ideas of the ruling class are ideas of minority. During slavery, the dominating ideas were the slave owners. And even during colonialism, the dominating ideas at that point that were actually advanced to be the common interest of the people were the interest of the colonial masters, the Imperial Britain. So even now in our country, there is, of course, a direct and a deliberate initiative to make the bourgeois ideas the dominating ideas. And in fact, they want to talk about the common interest to mean actually the common interest of the capitalist, the common interest of the business. So in that way, we are alive to that fact. And our primary objective is that the Kenyan left is not new. The name Communist Party of Kenya could look new, but we have a long history of experience of the struggle. And it is clear among our ranks that until we improve on political literacy of the people we intend to organize as a class to compete for political power, which is mainly the working class and the poor stratas of the Kenyan society, then we will not be able to defeat the anti-communism propaganda and also to advance our historical role, which is the ultimate overthrow of the dictatorship of the rich that exists in our country today. Now, if I come to the nature of the state that we have, the nature of the government that we have, I could say that that government can only qualify as a neo-colonial government. It is even, unfortunately, the fall of that government is inevitable because the government is even too weak that they have to form, operation alliances with their imperialist, friends of the West to be able to, completely subdue the movements, the progressive movements in our country. So for a fact, the political environment that we have a few national bourgeoisie, and most of the leadership is actually the comprado bourgeoisie that tries to only act, on behalf of imperialism or multinational institution. In fact, the Kenyan economy is very Eurocentric, I will say, in the sense that we have a history of plunder, not just from the white man, or by the colonial chiefs that we had, but the history of plunder has been going on in our country. In fact, Kenya is unprecedented because the same oppressive families that hijacked our independence in the 1960s, those same families are still dominating the political class as we see today. For example, President Uhuru Kenyatta is the son of Jomo Kenyatta that led us to that sham independence by negotiating with the Imperial British. So we see this is unprecedented. And if every time they want to negotiate, based on the rich families who will take the political power at that moment, and their interest is not the people's interest. Their interest is basically to actually, they are a board of directors, to oversee the affairs of Kenya for only the capitalist interest, for even the people that they pretend that they want to represent in political institutions. They do not care about them at all. In fact, they only organize the Kenyan people based on lies and rhetoric, and they own the media in many ways. And you probably know that media is a very powerful tool to dominate a people's mind. And we have seen it in many years. But we have also been able to actually advance in many areas in advancing our struggle. Today, we stand after the second liberation, because we always say that the first liberation could be the sham independence that was negotiated away from the peasants and the workers by the nationalist leaders who actually wanted to take positions of the white person to install a neo-colonial system. But we also take pride on the second liberation, and every day we are celebrating all the Kenyans that have martyred during the fight against, dictator Moi, who, of course, we hope that we will even be able to try him posthumously, even though now he is dead. But the wealth that he stole from the Kenyan people are still being held by his sons and his grandsons to dominate the Kenyan people for a long time. So we know that several people died in the street fighting for that space. And then after that, there was a fight for the new constitution. So we have seen that the struggle in Kenya has been progressing. But now at this opportune moment that we are expand the offensive is to now move from a national bourgeois democracy into a proper socialist democracy. In fact, that brings me to the point of the 2022 national elections, because people have been asking, why is Communist Party of Kenya taking part in the bourgeois national elections? But we are not deluded that we will not take power through bourgeois democracy. But that is where the Kenyan masses believe in today. So if we leave the elections of the Kenyan masses, the elections to the reactionary ideas, then we will not be able to reach the masses. So our primary objective is to utilize the environment that the political, people will be politically activated, and we should use that environment to advance our progressive propaganda among the masses. So the next year's election is going to be an event for the Communist Party of Kenya. But we know that our organizing or even mobilization will continue permanently before and after the election. The second aspect in the 2022, we see it that we're going to be able to measure the power of our organization in terms of advancing our offensive, and also to measure the political consciousness of the people. So if, for example, I contest for a political power in a constituency like Game, and I end up with 10 votes, then that will be a practical empirical formula that indeed only 10 people consciously understands the ideas that we believe in, and it will also be able to rate the amount of work that the Communist Party of Kenya is willing to, has to do to advance its agenda. And of course, finally, the 2022 election, we will also be able to bring out the contradictions between what they call a capitalist democracy as a dictatorship of the rich. Because we know that next year, it will be a year for the poor, especially under the lower stratas of the working class, to choose one of the rich people to rob from them. And we are going to tell them that clearly, that in the event that they fall for the propaganda of the capitalist political parties that we have, that are mainly dominated by imperialist stooges, then they can only extend their pain. And we will be able to remind them that even after the elections, that we need an alternative way to actually ultimately overthrow the dictatorship of the rich. And of course, we are also not hiding that we want to install another dictatorship, but now a dictatorship of the majority over the minority, to tell them that unless we capture in the political instrument to advance our struggles, then we are not. In fact, the rich people in Kenya today, as we know, will not give up the amount of land they have stolen. They will not give up. Kenya a few days ago has appeared in the international news on what we call the Pandora Papers. So it is amazing how much amount of money the president of Kenya is stashing abroad, while at the same time is telling us that he believes in a homegrown economy. So in that way, they will not give up that wealth. They will not give up the instruments of power unless they are experiencing a direct threat to their life, or even a direct threat for long jail terms. So in that way, we are going to continue to educate the masses that until we form an alternative political power among the working class people, then we will still continue to be dominated by a dictatorship of the few. And on the last two other things that probably you will find very unprecedented, that Kenya is a victim of international capital. Since 1990s, we have IMF and World Bank with us here. They have been implementing neoliberal policies and lecturing us on physical, economic mechanisms on how to run our economy. The worst years that we ever had in our country was 1990s, when they pushed the government of the day to implement the killer structural adjustment plans. And in that way, Kenya has not recovered from that. So Kenya was reduced to a raw material, cheap raw material exporter, where we only have people aching life out of poverty in big plantation farms that are owned by, foreign multinationals, and the processing of tea, the processing of coffee, our textile industries were closed. In fact, Kenya was reduced into a second-class economy. If you come to Kenya today, the clothes that the people put on majority are second-class clothes that are coming from overseas. If you look at the cars that we are driving on the streets, are second class. So in that way, we don't see a future of Kenya based on the neoliberal policies. And even now, the austerity measures that have been forced to try and service loans that were taken by this criminal government from IMF and World Bank is unsustainable. In fact, truth be told is that if the Communist Party of Kenya take political power in this country, it will be a case of Thomas Sankara, can't pay, won't pay. And if those individuals who sign those loans are still, in our perimeter, in our province, in our country, then they will be, held responsible in their individual capacity for having entered into certain criminal agreements with the international criminal, organizations. And then, of course, we know the effects of privatization. This silly talk of less state, more business. And all these NGOs in our countries, we call them criminals because they want to take the Kenyan people out of reality. They are just laundering money that they have stolen from mainly, poor countries. And they want to tell them that you can advance, that you can make money through starting some small petty business outside, like you try to run a shop, or you try to they tell you, start your own business, don't rely on government. But we know for a fact that individual labor since the Industrial Revolution has been replaced by social labor. So even if you are a petit bourgeoisie trying to run a shop to earn a living, You'll only need a multinational supermarket to come and open, and you have to close your shop and become a worker in the nearby supermarket. So our primary role in the Kenya, in East Africa, and also in Africa as the Communist Party of Kenya is to bring out contradictions that are inherent in the capitalist mode of production and postulate what is the humane system that will replace it. And we are convinced that the humane system that will be able to replace the inhuman capitalist system should be based on scientific socialism.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's very clear explanation of the party's idea and vision. And this kind of brings, going to what you were saying about the IMF and being a front for capitalist exploitation of Kenya. What is Canada's role in that? What is the final thing that you want the Canadian citizens watching the show and Canadian residents watching the show to know about the relationship between Kenya and Canada in this, financial cabal? Before we close,
maybe what I will say is that Canada has a very bad history in terms of foreign relations with other countries. In fact, they do not have what I call a foreign policy in relation to, based on solidarity, but it's also only some bankruptcy in foreign relations. Maybe if we are to take a walk in the historical, the historical memory, you will know that it is the Canadian government that financed what they are calling unfettered capitalism experiments in the Latin American countries. And those experiments devastated those countries, starting from Chile. And it's not something that we could be proud of. But the second thing is the imperialist interest of Canadian government and the Canadian business in the global world affairs, and their criminal marriage with the United States, in terms of advancing the United States imperialism in a very hegemonical way, and then trying to then rope in the European countries to dominate such a stage. And then the offensive that takes place in the global war, we have not seen any foreign policy from the Canadian government to try and restore peace and discourage, his main trading partner in the United States, in terms of coming out strongly to tell them that, bombing and killing Iraqi and Afghan and Libyan children is not what you should be doing at this point of civilization. And even if you look at the immigrant crisis, you look at the undocumented immigrants in the United States that are Canadians, they seem to be enjoying, the white man privileges at the expense of the Black immigrants. Very recently, we were very annoyed by our attack on the Haitian brothers and sisters at the border using horses. We haven't seen that on the Canadian border with the United States. So what we will want the Canadian people to do, and we would like to, on behalf of the Kenyan people and on behalf of the progressive people in Kenya, we will want to foster a people-to-people solidarity with the Canadian people, because these crimes that are being done by Canadian government, they are not being done on behalf of the entire Canadian people. They are being done, on just a few people within Canada who has instruments of power and want to advance, their own selfish initiatives. So in that way, we could see the Canadian foreign policy as clearly skewed towards only, anchoring the hegemony of the United States as you know, a unipolar prefect of the world. But also there are certain privileges that we must also be able to mention. For example, we have seen the warm relationship of the Canadian, ordinary Canadian people that every year, travel to Cuba against, the United States blockade. And the number of tourists that leave Canada to go to Havana has continued to increase as even more threats come from the United States. So in that way, we have seen that there is certain progressive developments that are happening in Canada. A few years ago, I met a few Canadians in Caracas organizing, under what they had called Fire This Time. And they were highlighting clearly the future of this world based on an alternative, solidarity, based on genuine love, based on, friendship. And we feel warm that there are Canadian people that care about the working class. We know of the presence of the Canadian Communist Party as well. And we've interacted with their youth wing for a moment now. And we just want to give them, courage that they have unconditioned and permanent solidarity from the people of the African continent. And we know that in the working class struggle, we have no borders. And in that strength of solidarity, we will continue to dent capitalism in our own areas of residence as we look for a global unity of the anti-imperialist movement and a socialist mode of production.
Excellent, excellent word to say to our audience. So with that, we're going to be closing the show. We're going to have our outro, and then we're going to have the song that Booker picked. Booker, what's the song we're going out with?
So I chose a song that actually is a secondary or tertiary production of the Communist Party of Kenya, and that is originally from Italian revolutionaries. That is Bella Ciao, but this time in Kiswahili.
Yes, so Bella Ciao, the Kiswahili version. It's a regional language, and it'll soon be all over the continent. So with that, we're going to have our outro, and we're going to have Bella Ciao, and then that'll be the end of the show. See you next week.